Hookake, so you want to own a fishing boat. Diesel engines rumbling before dawn, nets hauling up a silver, writhing catch. The genuine romance of a livelihood pulled directly from the ocean rather than earned behind a desk. You picture yourself as the independent captain, master of your own vessel, answerable to nobody, collecting a paycheck straight from the sea itself. That's the fantasy. Here's the actual business hiding underneath it, an industry where the federal government has, in most American fisheries, replaced the old free for all with a genuinely strange asset class called a fishing quota. A government-issued permission slip to catch a specific number of pounds of a specific species that now frequently costs more than the boat itself. An industry where fuel alone can consume a third or more of a trip's entire revenue before a single fish is sold, and where a single bad season, a quota cut, a closed fishery, a boat lost to weather, can wipe out a family that has fished the same waters for generations. Some fishing boat owners have built genuinely valuable, multi-generational operations, with quota holdings alone worth millions of dollars. Others, including entire fishing communities, have watched the value of their boats and their way of life collapse almost overnight when a fishery closed or a quota system reallocated access away from the small operators who used to dominate it. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why owning a fishing boat has become one of the strangest hybrids in the entire economy. A business that is simultaneously one of the oldest human industries on Earth and one of the most heavily financialized, government-regulated asset classes most people have never heard of. What you're actually buying before the money makes sense. You need to understand that in most of America's major commercial fisheries today, owning a fishing boat and owning the right to actually catch fish with it are two entirely separate assets. And confusing the two is where almost every misunderstanding about this modern industry begins. The vessel itself, the hull, the engine, the winches and nets and electronics, is a genuine, depreciating piece of industrial equipment, no different in principle from a truck or a tractor examined elsewhere in this series. The second asset, and in many of today's regulated fisheries, the considerably more valuable and financially consequential one, is quota, a government-allocated right to harvest a specific quantity of a specific fish species from a specific region during a specific season, issued under a regulatory system that fisheries economists call a catch share or individual transferable quota program. According to data tracked by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which manages federal fisheries policy in the United States, catch share programs now govern a substantial share of the country's most commercially significant fisheries, including major Alaskan groundfish and halibut fisheries, several New England fisheries, and others. A regulatory structure that replaced the older, unrestricted race to fish model specifically because that older model had driven repeated overfishing crises. Boats competing to catch as much as possible as fast as possible before a fishery-wide catch limit was reached. A competitive dynamic that rewarded oversized fleets and unsafe, weather-defying fishing practices far more than it rewarded sustainable, profitable operation. Under the modern quota system, an individual boat owner's actual annual revenue potential is capped, not by how good a fisherman they are or how large their boat is, but by how much quota they personally hold or lease. Meaning, the fundamental question of whether owning a fishing boat is a good business depends less on fishing skill than on a completely separate financial and regulatory question: how much quota do you own? How much did it cost you? And what can you actually catch and sell against it in a given year? The quota market nobody outside the industry knows exists is the single most consequential and most widely misunderstood structural fact in modern American commercial fishing, and it explains almost everything else about this industry's actual economics today. Quota, once allocated by regulators, generally to fishermen with a documented historical catch record in a given fishery, at the time the program was established, became a genuinely tradable financial asset, bought, sold, and leased among fishermen, investors, and in some fisheries, processing companies, on an active secondary market that operates almost entirely outside public awareness, despite representing in aggregate, billions of dollars of value. According to industry analysis and NOAA's own economic reporting on catch share programs, quota prices in some of the country's most valuable fisheries, Alaskan halibut and sablefish among the most closely watched examples, have risen substantially since these programs were established, in several cases appreciating considerably faster than general inflation over multi-decade periods, driven by the same basic scarcity dynamic that showed up in the taxi medallion and casino license systems examined elsewhere in this series. A regulator fixed the total available supply of fishing rights at a specific point in time, and demand for access to a genuinely valuable, finite natural resource has, in the fisheries where the underlying fish stock and market demand remain strong, pushed the price of that fixed supply access rights considerably higher over time. This creates a genuinely stark two-tier ownership reality within this industry. Fishermen who received quota allocations for free when a catch share program was first established, based on their historical fishing activity, hold what has become, in many of the most successful fisheries, a genuinely valuable, appreciating financial asset essentially handed to them by regulatory policy, an asset some of these original quota holders have since sold for millions of dollars, retiring wealthy from a program that cost them nothing to enter. Fishermen entering the industry today, by contrast, particularly younger fishermen without family quota holdings to inherit, face the genuinely difficult reality of having to purchase or lease quota at current market prices simply to have the legal right to catch fish at all, a barrier to entry that has become one of the most significant and most widely discussed within the industry itself. Structural challenges facing the next generation of American commercial fishermen. Since the boat itself has become a genuinely important sense, the smaller and less financially consequential half of what it actually costs to enter this business today, the cost of actually building the fleet. Capital cost of entering commercial fishing varies enormously by fishery, vessel size, and target species, but even setting quota costs aside entirely, the vessel itself represents a genuinely substantial capital commitment. According to industry data on commercial fishing, vessel costs, a modest, smaller-scale commercial fishing vessel suitable for near-shore or inshore fisheries can run anywhere from $50,000 to $300,000, depending heavily on age, condition, and whether it's purchased used, which represents the overwhelming majority of vessel transactions in this industry given how expensive new commercial vessel construction has become. While a genuinely large, offshore-capable vessel suitable for major fisheries like Alaskan crab or groundfish, the kind of vessel featured on television programs that have brought public attention to this industry's genuine physical danger, can cost anywhere from $1 million to $10 million or considerably more, depending on size, age, and equipment, with a new build vessel of this scale representing a multi-million-dollar capital commitment that few individual fishermen can finance without substantial specialized marine lending or, increasingly, side investment capital. Engine and mechanical systems represent a genuinely significant, recurring capital category specific to this industry, since a commercial vessel's engine operates under sustained, heavy-duty conditions for extended periods at sea, and a major engine overhaul or replacement, a cost that can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars for a larger vessel, represents a substantial, periodically recurring capital expense that a boat owner has to plan and finance around. On top of the ongoing routine maintenance, every vessel requires simply to remain seaworthy and legally compliant with Coast Guard inspection requirements. Fishing gear itself, nets, pots, longline equipment, and the specific harvesting technology appropriate to a given fishery and target species, represents another substantial, and, for gear like crab pots, genuinely significant recurring cost category, since gear gets lost or damaged during normal fishing operations at a rate that requires ongoing replacement investment. And a large-scale crab or groundfish operation can have hundreds of thousands of dollars of gear deployed and at risk during a single fishing season. And then there's the quota cost itself, layered on top of all of this vessel and equipment investment, with quota purchase prices in the most valuable fisheries running into the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars depending on the specific species, region, and quantity being acquired, meaning a genuinely well-equipped entry into one of America's most valuable commercial fisheries today can require a total capital commitment, vessel, gear, and quota combined, running well into the millions of dollars. A barrier to entry that has fundamentally reshaped who can realistically enter this industry compared to the pre-quota era. The bill that never stops operating a commercial fishing vessel involves cost categories that arrive with genuine, punishing regularity, regardless of how good a season's catch turns out to be. Fuel represents consistently one of the largest and most volatile operating costs in this entire industry, and according to industry cost breakdowns, fuel can represent 20 to 40% or more of a fishing trip's total operating cost, depending on the fishery, the distance traveled to the fishing grounds, and prevailing diesel prices. A genuinely enormous share of total operating expense. That means a fishing boat's profitability can swing substantially based on fuel market conditions entirely outside any individual captain's control, layered directly on top of the already substantial uncertainty of how much fish the boat will actually catch on a given trip. Crew costs represent a distinctive and distinctively structured cost category specific to this industry, since commercial fishing crew are frequently compensated not through a fixed wage, but through a share system, where crew members receive a percentage of the trip's net revenue after operating costs are deducted. A compensation structure that aligns crew incentives directly with the boat's actual catch success, but that also means a boat owner's labor costs, unlike a fixed payroll obligation, scale directly with revenue rather than representing a predictable fixed expense. A structure that provides genuine downside protection during a poor season, but that also means a boat owner captures less of the upside during a genuinely excellent one compared to a fixed-wage crew structure. Insurance represents a genuinely significant and genuinely necessary cost category given how dangerous commercial fishing remains as an occupation, with the Bureau of Labor Statistics having repeatedly ranked commercial fishing among the most dangerous occupations in the entire United States economy by fatality rate, meaning vessel insurance, protection and indemnity coverage, and workers' compensation equivalent coverage for crew represents substantial, non-negotiable costs that scale considerably with vessel size and the specific danger profile of the fishery being pursued, with the harshest offshore fisheries in the most dangerous waters. Alaskan crab fishing being the industry's most publicly recognized example, commanding meaningfully higher insurance costs than common shore operations. Maintenance and dockage represent ongoing, unavoidable costs specific to operating any vessel, since a boat requires regular haulouts for hull maintenance and inspection, ongoing engine and mechanical upkeep, and slip or mooring fees at whatever port serves as the vessel's home base, costs that continue accruing during the off-season, and during any period a vessel isn't actively generating fishing revenue. Precisely the kind of fixed cost against variable revenue structure that has appeared again and again across the capital-intensive, weather and market-exposed businesses examined throughout this series. How the money actually comes back. Revenue in commercial fishing depends on a combination of factors that interact in a genuinely complex way, and understanding this interaction explains why this industry's profitability can vary so dramatically from boat to boat and year to year, even within the exact same fishery. The wholesale price a fisherman receives for their catch, the ex-vessel price in industry terminology, fluctuates based on overall market supply and demand for that specific species, meaning a boat owner's revenue depends not just on how many pounds they land, but on what those pounds happen to be worth on the specific day and in the specific market they're sold into. A genuine commodity price exposure that operates independently of, and sometimes in the opposite direction from, the boat's own catch success in a given season. Direct-to-consumer and value-added sales have become an increasingly significant strategy for a meaningful segment of smaller-scale fishing operations, specifically seeking to capture more of the final retail value of their catch, rather than accepting the wholesale ex-vessel price alone. with community-supported fishery programs, dockside direct sales, and value-added processing, filleting, smoking, packaging under the boat's own brand, allowing some operators to capture meaningfully higher revenue per pound than a purely wholesale commodity sale would generate. Though this strategy requires additional marketing, processing infrastructure, and direct customer relationship management that represents a genuinely different business skill set than simply catching and delivering fish to a processor. Quota leasing represents a genuinely significant, and for some owners, increasingly central, revenue stream entirely separate from actual fishing operations. Since a quota holder who owns more quota than they personally intend to fish in a given season can lease that unused quota to another fisherman in exchange for a share of the value it generates, meaning some quota holders, particularly those who acquired quota during the original allocation process and have since scaled back their own active fishing or retired from fishing entirely while retaining ownership of the quota itself, generate meaningful, essentially passive income purely from quota leasing without operating a vessel at all, a dynamic that has drawn genuine controversy within fishing communities specifically because it represents quota functioning as a pure financial investment vehicle, disconnected from the actual working fisherman. The original allocation program was ostensibly designed to support the volatility nobody wants to talk about beyond the fuel price and crew share dynamics already discussed. Commercial fishing carries several other distinctive, ongoing risks. Stock and quota fluctuation represents a genuinely significant, recurring risk specific to this industry. Since fishery managers adjust the total allowable catch for a given species year to year based on scientific stock assessments, meaning a boat owner's actual available quota, and therefore their maximum possible revenue, can be substantially reduced from one season to the next if a fish population shows signs of decline, a regulatory response to genuine conservation necessity that nonetheless represents a real, largely unpredictable revenue risk entirely outside any individual fisherman's control. Weather and safety risk represents perhaps the most viscerally significant and most historically deadly risk specific to this industry, since commercial fishing vessels operate in genuinely dangerous ocean conditions, and severe weather can not only force the cancellation of fishing trips, directly reducing revenue during whatever window that weather affects, but represents a genuine, ongoing threat to vessel and crew safety that has made this industry one of the most dangerous occupations in America by any measure. A risk that shapes everything from insurance costs to vessel design to the fundamental calculus of whether a captain chooses to fish through marginal weather conditions rather than lose valuable fishing days during a short season. Market price volatility for the catch itself represents a genuine, ongoing commodity exposure, since vessel prices for major commercial species can swing considerably based on global supply from competing fishing nations. Farmed seafood competition, particularly significant for species like salmon, where farm production has grown to represent a substantial share of total global supply, and broader consumer demand shifts, meaning a fisherman can have a genuinely excellent catch season by volume and still see disappointing revenue if wholesale prices happen to be depressed at exactly the time that catch reaches market. And regulatory and quota policy risk represents an ongoing structural vulnerability specific to this heavily regulated industry, since fishery management decisions, total catch limits, season length, gear restrictions, and the fundamental structure of quota allocation programs themselves are made through a political and scientific regulatory process that individual fishermen have only limited influence over, meaning a fisherman's entire business model can be reshaped by a regulatory decision made in response to environmental, scientific, or political considerations that have little to do with any individual boat owner's own operational choices. The real case study, the Bering Sea crab fishery collapsado. Understand how directly and severely these regulatory and biological risks can materialize in practice. Look at what happened to the Bering Sea snow crab fishery off Alaska, one of the most commercially valuable and culturally recognized American fisheries. Made famous to a broad public audience through television programming depicting its genuine physical danger. Following a period of strong harvests, fishery managers and researchers documented a genuinely catastrophic and scientifically unprecedented collapse in the snow crab population, with NOAA's own stock assessments estimating the crab population fell by roughly 90% over a remarkably short period spanning the early 2020s. A decline researchers have attributed substantially to unusually warm ocean temperatures in the Bering Sea, disrupting the crab-specific cold water habitat requirements and increasing their metabolic needs beyond what the available food supply could sustain. An ecological disruption tied to broader ocean warming trends, rather than to any conventional overfishing dynamic the existing quota management system had been specifically designed to prevent. In response to the stock collapse, federal fishery managers made the genuinely drastic decision to cancel the snow crab season entirely for the 2022 to 2023 fishing year, the first time in the fishery's history that this specific harvest had been completely closed. A closure that eliminated the season's entire potential revenue for every vessel holding snow crab quota in that fishery, and the season remained closed again the following year as the crab population showed no meaningful sign of recovery, representing a sustained, multi-year elimination of what had historically been a genuinely lucrative revenue stream for the specific fleet of vessels built and financed specifically around this fishery. According to industry reporting on the crab fleet's resulting financial distress, vessel owners who had taken on substantial debt to finance boats and quota specifically for the snow crab fishery faced genuine, severe financial hardship during the closure, since their vessels, gear, and quota holdings, representing millions of dollars of specialized capital investment, generated essentially zero revenue from this specific fishery for multiple consecutive years, while the underlying debt service obligations on that capital investment continued regardless. A crisis significant enough that it prompted federal disaster declarations and financial assistance requests specifically for the affected Bering Sea crab fleet. The Bering Sea crab collapse illustrates a genuinely crucial structural lesson specific to this industry that echoes the drought risk we examined in ranching and the catastrophe risk we examined in insurance. Unlike a business risk that stems from mismanagement or competitive pressure, this collapse originated from a biological and environmental disruption entirely outside any individual fisherman's control or even outside the effective reach of the fishery's own regulatory management system, since the existing catch limit and quota structure had been specifically designed to prevent overfishing-driven population decline. A genuinely different, and as ocean warming trends continue, an increasingly significant risk category that this industry's traditional risk management tools were never originally built to address. 2 scenarios. Let's build the honest math the way an actual owner has to run it. In the good scenario, you own a well-maintained vessel with a meaningful quota holding in a genuinely stable, well-managed fishery. Quota you either acquired during an original allocation at minimal cost or purchased years ago before prices in that specific fishery appreciated substantially, giving you a genuinely valuable asset base beyond simply the vessel itself. Your operation benefits from a stable target species whose population has remained healthy under the fishery's management plan, reasonable fuel costs relative to the vessel price you're receiving for your catch, and an experienced, reliable crew working under a share system that has aligned everyone's incentives toward a safe, efficient, profitable season. In a genuinely strong year like this, a well-capitalized fishing operation can generate meaningful annual profit from the fishing operation itself, while your underlying quota holding, entirely independent of that year's specific operating profit, continues representing a substantial, appreciating capital asset that provides genuine long-term wealth beyond whatever any single season's catch happens to be worth. Precisely, the combination of operating income and appreciating underlying asset value that has made quota ownership in the strongest fisheries a genuinely attractive, if highly specialized, long-term investment for the fishermen and investors who hold it. Now, the harder scenario. You've taken on substantial debt to finance both a vessel and a meaningful quota purchase, specifically targeting a single, historically lucrative fishery, only to have that specific fish population experience a genuine, unprecedented biological collapse driven by environmental factors your management plan was never designed to prevent, forcing a multi-year closure of the exact fishery your entire capital investment was built around. Your vessel, your gear, and your quota holding, representing years of accumulated capital investment, generate essentially zero fishing revenue during the closure, while your debt service obligations on that same capital investment continue accruing regardless, and you find yourself managing a genuinely existential financial crisis with limited practical options. Since your specialized vessel and gear frequently can't be easily or profitably redirected toward an entirely different fishery, and your quota holding in the collapsed fishery, still nominally an asset on paper, generates no actual revenue and carries genuinely uncertain resale value given the underlying population collapse that triggered the crisis in the first place. The gap between these two scenarios isn't a modest variance in a seasonal catch forecast. It's the difference between one of the more durable, appreciating asset-owning small businesses available in American natural resource industries and a genuine financial catastrophe driven by an ecological disruption that no amount of operational excellence, careful debt management, or fishing skill could have reasonably anticipated or prevented. The real payoff, the difference between fishing boat owners who have built lasting, multi-generational wealth in this business and those who have faced the kind of existential crisis the Bering Sea crab fleet experienced, comes down to a combination of structural positioning and genuine risk discipline, understanding, with genuine clarity, that quota ownership, not simply the vessel itself, represents the industry's actual primary long-term asset in most of today's regulated fisheries, has become an essential piece of financial literacy for anyone evaluating this business. Since a fisherman who focuses purely on vessel and fishing operational excellence, while underappreciating the quota market's own separate financial dynamics, is missing a substantial share of what actually determines this business's long-term economics. Maintaining genuine diversification across multiple fisheries or species, rather than concentrating an entire operation's capital investment around a single target species, the way the specialized Bering Sea crab fleet had, provides real protection against exactly the kind of single fishery biological collapse that no fishery management system, however well designed, can entirely rule out, particularly as ocean warming trends introduce genuinely novel ecological disruption risks that historical fishery management experience wasn't originally built to anticipate. And maintaining conservative debt levels relative to a fishing operation's genuinely variable, weather and biology-dependent revenue, rather than financing vessel and quota purchases based on optimistic projections from a fishery's strongest recent years, represents the same fundamental lesson that has recurred throughout this entire series across ranching, shipping, and power generation alike. A capital-intensive business with genuinely unpredictable annual revenue requires a debt structure conservative enough to survive the industry's inevitable bad years, not merely optimized for its good ones. The romance of the fishing boat, the genuine skill and courage this profession demands, the deep, multi-generational connection many fishing families have to specific waters and specific fisheries, is entirely real. And it's precisely the operators who've paired that romance with genuine financial sophistication about quota markets, genuine diversification discipline, and genuine conservatism around debt, that have built something durable enough to survive the kind of biological and regulatory shocks this industry has always faced. And, as ocean conditions continue shifting, seems likely to face with increasing frequency going forward. Which means the honest answer to whether owning a fishing boat can build genuine, lasting wealth is yes, for the operators disciplined enough to understand that in the modern, quota-governed version of this ancient industry, the fish themselves were never quite the whole business. The government issued right to catch them, and the discipline to manage that right, and the capital built around it conservatively, has quietly become just as important to whether a fishing family's boat sinks or sails across the generations that follow.